We are living through a moment in American history where the veil of political decorum has not just been lifted, it has been shredded, incinerated, and scattered to the wind. As the nation enters the first week of Black History Month, a time traditionally reserved for reflection, education, and the celebration of the profound contributions of Black Americans to the fabric of our democracy, we are instead forced to confront a reality that feels less like 2026 and more like 1950. The vision of Martin Luther King Jr., a dream of a nation, where children are judged solely by the content of their character, has collided violently with the conduct of the current occupant of the White House. In a display that has shocked even the most cynical political observers, the president chose to mark this sacred month not with a message of unity or progress, but by broadcasting a flagrantly racist depiction of the first Black president and first lady to millions of followers in the dead of night. This was not a subtle dog whistle hidden in policy jargon. This was not a slip of the tongue during a heated rally. This was a bullhorn. In a late-night social media spree filled with conspiracy theories and grievances, the president shared an image depicting Barack and Michelle Obama as apes. We have to stop and really process the weight of that specific imagery. This isn't just an insult, it is a violent historical trope that has been weaponized for centuries by slave traders, segregationists, and white supremacists to dehumanize Black people. It is the visual language of lynching. It is the specific propaganda used to justify atrocities by stripping human beings of their humanity. The intent behind sharing such an image is unmistakable. It is designed to degrade, to humiliate, and to signal to a specific subset of the population that the highest levels of government share their darkest prejudices. The aftermath of this post followed a pattern that has become exhausting and familiar to the American public. Yet we must not let our exhaustion turn into acceptance. The White House press office, when pressed by reporters, attempted to spin the post with an excuse that insulted the intelligence of every single person listening. They claimed it was a misunderstood internet meme, a reference to the Lion King, and dismissed the palpable horror of the nation as fake outrage. This defense collapsed immediately under the weight of basic facts, primarily the fact that there are no apes in The Lion King, but the accuracy of the excuse was never the point. The point was the gaslighting. The point was to tell you that what you saw with your own eyes didn't happen, or if it did, you are the problem for noticing it. However, something shifted this time. The toxicity of the post was so radioactive that it cracked the usually impenetrable wall of partisan loyalty. We saw a sitting Republican senator from South Carolina, a man who has stood by this administration through scandals, impeachments, and indictments, finally draw a line in the sand. He called the post the most racist thing he had ever seen come out of this White House. Another Republican congressman labeled it a grave failure of judgment that weakens the foundations of our democracy. Under this mounting pressure, the post was eventually deleted after 12 hours. 12 hours where it sat on the feed of the most powerful man on earth, endorsing a message of hate. The administration eventually blamed a low-level staffer for the error, a convenient scapegoat for a systemic rot. Yet, tellingly, there has been no apology issued to the Obamas. There has been no public statement of regret from the president himself. The silence speaks louder than the deletion. To truly understand this moment, we must recognize that this is not an isolated incident or a glitch in the programming. It is the operating system of this entire political career. We are looking at a figure whose very entry into public life was marked by a federal lawsuit for discriminatory housing practices against Black and Puerto Rican renters in New York City. This is the man who took out full-page ads calling for the execution of the Central Park five innocent young Black and Latino men, and has never apologized even after their full exoneration by DNA evidence. This is the architect of the birther movement, a campaign built entirely on the racist lie that the first Black president was illegitimate and foreign. From dining with white supremacists to disparaging Black prosecutors as animals and peekaboo, the pattern is undeniable. We are not dealing with a mask-off moment because there was never really a mask to begin with. The racism is not a bug, it is a feature. This reality forces us to look away from the podium and look toward the enablers. We are looking at a corporate landscape where major titans of industry continue to normalize this behavior through their silence and their financial support. They stand shoulder to shoulder with the administration at black tie galas, they cut deals for deregulation, and they look the other way when the president traffics in dehumanization. This complicity has birthed a new form of civic agency that is rapidly gaining steam across the country, the unsubscribed movement. Citizens are waking waking up to the realization that while they may not be able to control the White House feed or the legislative agenda, they can absolutely control where their money goes. There is a growing momentum of individuals canceling subscriptions, changing providers, and boycotting services tied to these corporate enablers. It is a reclaiming of power, a refusal to finance one's own degradation. It is a recognition that every dollar spent with a complicit corporation is a vote for the normalization of hate. But while the racism on social media dominates the headlines and the cable news chyrons, a more tangible, physical, and terrifying cruelty is unfolding in the Midwest, specifically in Minnesota. This is where the rhetoric of the administration transforms into the reality of state violence. The administration recently announced a drawdown of immigration enforcement agents in Minneapolis following intense public backlash and cratering poll numbers. They went on television and promised a softer touch, a reduction in the visible presence of federal agents in communities that have been living in terror. But reporting from the ground reveals this to be a total fabrication. Residents, community organizers, and local officials confirm that the crackdown is as aggressive as ever. The drawdown was a PR move. The operation is still a go. The face of this cruelty has become a 5-year-old boy named Liam, captured in heartbreaking photos wearing a blue bunny hat. Federal agents detained this child, a kindergartner, and attempted to use him as bait to lure out undocumented family members for arrest. This is not law enforcement. This is hostage-taking under the color of authority. Despite the promises of a drawdown, the government has filed motions to expedite deportation proceedings against his family and end their asylum claims. The terror in these communities is palpable. School superintendents report that all hell broke loose just hours after the administration promised a reduction in force. Federal vehicles were spotted patrolling school pickup lines, places that are supposed to be sanctuaries for children. School board members reported being tailed from their homes by federal agents. Signal chats in these neighborhoods are lighting up day and night with sightings of federal vehicles, and the community has been forced into a state of hypervigilance, organizing their own ICE Watch groups because they can no longer trust a single word coming from their government. When a government lies about its use of force against its own population, the social contract is broken. Perhaps most alarming, and what connects the racism in Washington to the raids in Minneapolis, is the structural shift happening within the Department of Justice to sustain this crackdown. We are seeing reports that military lawyers, JAG attorneys are being drafted to replace civilian prosecutors in federal criminal cases stemming from these immigration sweeps. Why is this happening? Because civilian prosecutors are resigning in waves? Experienced career attorneys are looking at the cases being brought, looking at the tactics being used, like using 5-year-olds as bait, and they are refusing to be a part of it. They are unwilling to carry out these directives. So the administration is bypassing the civilian conscience. They are bringing in military lawyers who operate under a different chain of command to prosecute civilians in domestic courts. This is crossing a Rubicon. It is a subtle but distinct militarization of the justice system, normalizing the use of soldiers to prosecute civilians because the civilian system has developed a moral objection to the administration's agenda. And this creates a terrifying picture of the current state of the union. On one hand, we have the symbolic violence of a president disseminating racist tropes to millions, degrading the cultural fabric of the nation. On the other, we have the physical violence of a state apparatus that lies about its activities, targets children to meet quotas, and replaces civilian lawyers with military personnel to bypass institutional guardrails. The disconnect between the official narrative and the reality on the ground has never been wider. The administration tells us they are pulling back on enforcement while simultaneously ramping up operations near elementary schools. They tell us they are uniting the country while posting images that harken back to the darkest eras of segregation. They tell us to move on from the outrage, hoping that exhaustion will eventually turn into submission. They want us to believe that this is just politics, that this is normal, that the outrage is fake. But the pushback is real and it is growing. From the bipartisan condemnation in the Senate to the everyday citizens in Minnesota risking their safety to protect their neighbors, to the people quietly unsubscribing from complicit corporations, there is a refusal to accept this as the new normal. The danger lies in numbness. The danger lies in seeing a racist post from the president and scrolling past it because it's just another day or hearing about a 5-year-old detainee and feeling helpless. The antidote to this despair is witnessing the clarity of the cruelty and choosing actively not to look away. We are watching the machinery of the state being turned against the people it is meant to serve, and the only check on that power right now is the refusal of the public to be gaslit into silence. Whether it is through economic boycotts, community organizing, or simply bearing witness to the truth, the response to this moment will define the character of the nation for generations to come. We are in a struggle for the soul of the country, and as we have seen this week, the opposition is not just political. It is a fundamental clash over human dignity and the rule of law. This isn't just about a tweet or a single raid. It is about a philosophy of governance that views certain segments of the population as less than human. When the president posts an image depicting the first black family as apes, he is not just making a bad joke. He is signaling that he does not view black Americans as full citizens worthy of respect. When his administration uses a 5-year-old boy as bait, they are signaling that immigrant families do not have the same rights to family integrity as everyone else. And when they replace civilian prosecutors with military personnel, they are signaling that the rule of law is an obstacle to be overcome, not a principle to be upheld. The corporate enablers who stand by this, who continue to fund the galas and the campaigns, are making a calculation. They are calculating that the tax cuts and the deregulation are worth the cost of the nation's soul. They are betting that the public will forget, or that we will be too distracted by the next scandal to hold them accountable. But the unsubscribe movement suggests that their calculation might be wrong. People are starting to connect the dots between the products they buy and the policies they abhor. They are realizing that they have agency, and they are starting to use it. So, in Minneapolis, the resistance is even more visceral. It is neighbors watching out for neighbors. It is school superintendents standing up to federal agents. It is a refusal to let fear dictate their lives. This is the true spirit of American democracy, not the pomp and circumstance of the White House, but the grit and determination of ordinary people standing up for each other in the face of state overreach. As we move further into this month and deeper into this administration's term, we must keep our eyes open. We must reject the gaslighting that tells us we didn't see what we saw. We must reject the excuses that blame staffers for the president's own worldview. And we must reject the idea that we are powerless to change it. The history of this nation is a history of struggle, of people pushing back against injustice, even when the odds seemed insurmountable. That is the history we celebrate this month, and that is the history we must continue to write today. We are at a crossroads. One path leads to a country where racism is normalized, where the military polices the streets and the courts, and where children are pawns in a political game. The other path leads to a country that lives up to its creed, where dignity is a right, not a privilege, and where the government answers to the people, not the other way around. The choice is ours, and the time to choose is now. The silence of the enablers is deafening, but the voice of the people can be louder. It starts with seeing the truth, speaking it clearly, and refusing to back down. This is not the time for fatigue. This is the time for focus. Because if we look away now, we may not recognize the country we see when we finally look back. The story of Liam in the blue bunny hat is not just a tragedy, it is a warning. It is a warning of what happens when we allow humanity to be stripped from our politics. It is a warning of what happens when we accept alternative facts as reality. And it is a warning that the institutions we rely on to protect us, the courts, the prosecutors, the norms, are more fragile than we think. They can be eroded, replaced, and weaponized if we are not vigilant. So, as we watch the news cycle churn, let us not forget the images that defined this week. The racist caricature of a former president and the frightened face of a 5-year-old boy. These are the two faces of the current crisis. One represents the ideological rot at the top. The other represents the human cost at the bottom. And in between them lies the rest of us, deciding what kind of country we want to be. Let that decision be guided by conscience, by courage, and by an unwavering commitment to the truth. The noise will continue, the gaslighting will intensify, but the facts remain. And as long as we hold on to the facts, we hold on to the power to change them.